Herman Shaw was promised a full life. A poor farmer in Alabama, he was offered free meals, regular medical checkups, and even treatment for what doctors called his bad blood. During the Great Depression, it must have sounded like a lifeline. But what he actually received was a 40-year-long death sentence. He was one of 600 black men enrolled in a study, but they weren't patients. They were unwilling participants in one of the most infamous and devastating betrayals in the history of science, the Tuskegee experiment. This is the story of the men who were betrayed and the devastating cost to them and their families. It all started in 1932, when the United States Public Health Service launched a study in Macon County, Alabama. The stated goal was to observe the natural progression of untreated syphilis. To do this, they targeted poor, rural African-American sharecroppers, men who had little to no access to health care. In total, 600 men were enrolled, 399 who had latent syphilis, and 201 who served as a control group. The men were never told they had syphilis. Instead, they were lured by promises of free medical care, free meals, and burial insurance for participating in a study on bad blood, a vague local term for a range of ailments. This lie was the foundation of the entire experiment. The men believed they were finally receiving the health care they had been denied their whole lives. They faithfully showed up for exams, took the placebos they were given, and even endured incredibly painful and dangerous spinal taps, all under the false belief that these were special treatments. In reality, they weren't being cured. They were being observed like specimens in a lab. By the 1940s, penicillin had been identified as a reliable cure for syphilis. This should have ended the study. The researchers now had a clear moral and ethical duty to treat the men and stop their suffering. But they didn't. Instead, the U.S. Public Health Service made a deliberate decision to withhold the cure. The study was deemed too important to stop. For decades, researchers went to extraordinary lengths to prevent the men from receiving treatment. They gave local doctors lists of participants with instructions not to administer penicillin. When some men were drafted for World War II and mandatory blood tests revealed syphilis, the study's doctors intervened to ensure they weren't treated. They were determined to follow the disease to its grim conclusion, autopsy. Although a few men received penicillin by chance for other illnesses, the study effectively became one of undertreated syphilis, with researchers preserving their data at the cost of human lives. This wasn't passive observation. It was a systematic 40-year effort to deny life-saving care. The consequences for the men and their families were catastrophic. As the years turned into decades, their bodies were ravaged by a disease they didn't know they had. They suffered the brutal complications of tertiary syphilis, cardiovascular damage, neurological decay, blindness, and insanity. By the time the study was exposed, at least 128 men had died from syphilis or related complications. Only 74 of the original 399 infected participants were still alive. The devastation extended beyond the men themselves. At least 40 wives contracted the disease, and 19 children were born with congenital syphilis, condemned to lifelong health problems before they had a chance to live. Families endured deep shame and isolation as communities viewed the disease as the scourge of the earth. The study inflicted not only physical suffering, but lasting emotional trauma. For 40 years, this horror continued in the shadows. In 1966, and again in 1968, Public Health Service employee Peter Buxton filed ethical protests, but they were dismissed. In 1972, he leaked the story to Associated Press reporter Gene Heller. The story broke on July 25th in the Washington Star and appeared on the front page of the New York Times the next day, shocking the nation. Public outrage forced the government to terminate the study. In 1973, civil rights attorney Fred Gray filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of the victims, resulting in a $10 million settlement and the creation of the Tuskegee Health Benefit Program to provide medical care for survivors and their families. The fight for justice was long, and the scars remain. It's essential that these stories are not only remembered but deeply understood. To ensure this history is never forgotten, please subscribe to our channel and share this video. In 1997, 25 years after the study was exposed, the United States government issued a formal public apology. With 5 of the 8 remaining survivors present, including Herman Shaw, President Bill Clinton acknowledged the truth. What the United States government did was shameful, and I am sorry. To our African American citizens, I am sorry that your federal government orchestrated a study so clearly racist. The apology could never undo the damage. The Tuskegee experiment killed and injured hundreds of innocent people and planted a deep, justified mistrust in the medical establishment among Black Americans, a legacy that continues to affect health outcomes today. The story of Herman Shaw and the other men is a brutal reminder of what happens when science loses its humanity and a call for remembrance, vigilance, and the promise to never look away again.